At 17, she thought her life was over when she was forced to marry. A millionaire who had everything, except the courage to love or be loved, but this time the love he'd been running from. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. The December sun in New York City burned relentlessly through the windows of St. Francis Academy when Luna Mitchell gathered her books for the last time that semester. At 17, almost 18, she couldn't imagine that this would also be her last day of freedom. The young woman with wavy brown hair and honey-colored eyes walked through the hallways with the lightness of someone who still believed the future belonged to her. Her friends talked about college applications, universities, dreams that seemed attainable when you're 17 with the whole world ahead of you. On Fifth Avenue, her family's driver waited with the black sedan she had known since childhood. During the journey to the Upper East Side, Luna observed the city pulsing outside. Hurried business people, street vendors, the chaotic traffic that was New York's soundtrack. She didn't know she was memorizing that sensation of belonging to the world, because in a few hours she would discover that her life had been negotiated like merchandise. The Mitchell mansion stood imposingly between high walls and perfectly manicured gardens. 3 floors of classical architecture that once represented the pinnacle of her father's business success, but now concealed decades of debt and disguised bankruptcies. Luna climbed the marble stairs as she did every day, her low heels echoing through the main hall, unaware that this familiar sound would soon be replaced by a deafening silence. The living room felt different. There was a solemnity in the air that she couldn't decipher. Her father, Robert Mitchell, sat in the leather armchair where he usually read the Sunday paper. But there was no newspaper, only a thick, yellowed envelope on the mahogany table. Her mother, Claire, occupied the sofa with her usual rigid posture, hands intertwined over her beige dress, gaze lost in some undefined point on the wall. "Sit down, Luna," said Robert without raising his eyes. His voice carried a weight she had never heard before. "We need to talk about your future." The young woman felt a strange chill run up her spine. Future was a word that should bring expectation, excitement, but the way her father pronounced it sounded like a sentence. She settled into the chair in front of him, her hands instinctively tightening over her school uniform skirt. "Dad, did something happen?" Robert finally raised his gaze. His eyes, once full of life and ambition, now seemed those of a defeated man desperately trying to maintain dignity. He extended his hand and pushed the envelope toward her. "You're getting married, Luna, to Dominic Lancaster." The words floated in the air as if spoken in a foreign language. Luna blinked several times, trying to process what she had just heard. Marriage was something distant, something that would happen someday when she chose, with someone she loved. It wasn't a decision her father could make for her on any random December afternoon. "I don't understand, Dad. Married? But I don't even know this man." "You will meet him. The contract has already been signed." The word contract hit Luna like a punch to the stomach. Contract, as if she were a business, a property being transferred to a new owner. Her hands trembled when she opened the envelope and saw the typewritten pages full of clauses and conditions that seemed written in another century. "Mum?" Luna turned to Claire, looking for some sign that this was a nightmare, a misunderstanding, but her mother kept her gaze fixed on the wall as if she weren't present in the room, as if she hadn't been present in her own life for years. "Your mother agrees with me," said Robert, his voice firmer now. "Dominic Lancaster is one of the most powerful men in the country. You'll have a life many women only dream of. But I don't want the life other women dream of. I want my own life." Luna's shout echoed through the room, but was absorbed by the heavy silence that followed. Robert stood up and walked to the window, hands crossed behind his back. When he spoke again, his voice had a tone of finality that froze the young woman's blood. "Luna, our family is bankrupt. Completely bankrupt. The debts I've accumulated over the years could send us to prison. Dominic Lancaster has offered enough money to settle everything under one condition: marriage to you. It's either this or we lose everything. The house, the name, dignity, maybe even our freedom." The truth fell on Luna like an avalanche. Throughout her entire life, she had lived a carefully constructed lie. The luxury, the security, the social position. It was all an illusion about to collapse. She was the bargaining chip to prevent total collapse. "I'm 17, she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm not even a legal adult yet." "You'll be 18 in 3 weeks. The wedding is set for January." Luna felt the world spinning around her. January. In a few weeks she would be the wife of a man she didn't know, living a life she didn't choose, imprisoned in a destiny others had decided for her. "And if I refuse?" Robert turned slowly, and Luna saw in his eyes something that frightened her more than any threat. Absolute desperation. "Then we'll all pay the price." The 2 weeks that followed passed like a blur of preparations that Luna observed as a spectator of her own life. Stylists came and went from the Mitchell mansion with dresses, shoes, and jewelry that she tried on mechanically, like a doll being dressed for a display window. Her mother coordinated everything with cold efficiency, as if she were organizing any social event, not the forced marriage of her only daughter. Luna discovered more about Dominic Lancaster through magazines and online news than through conversations with him. Dominic Arthur Lancaster, 36 years old, CEO of Lancaster Holdings, which controlled everything from construction companies to investment banks. In photos, he was a man of almost cruel beauty, black hair always impeccably combed, ice blue eyes, square jaw, and a posture that radiated absolute power. He wore suits that cost more than cars, attended events where ministers and presidents vied for his attention. But there was something in the photos that intrigued Luna. In all of them, Dominic was alone. Even surrounded by people, he seemed isolated, as if there were an invisible barrier between him and the rest of the world. He never appeared touching anyone, not even a casual handshake. His hands always remained in his pockets or crossed, his smiles never reaching his eyes. The first time Luna saw him in person was 3 days before the wedding, during a dinner at the Lancaster mansion. The property was located in Greenwich, Connecticut, hidden behind walls that more resembled fortifications. When the gate opened, Luna felt as if she were entering another world, or perhaps a very sophisticated prison. The Lancaster mansion was a monster of stone and glass that extended across acres of somber gardens. Gothic architecture mixed with modern touches created an atmosphere that oscillated between majestic and oppressive. Towers rose at impossible angles, windows too high to see inside, staircases that seemed to lead nowhere. It was the type of place where echoes lived longer than words. Luna was received by a butler with graying hair who spoke only when necessary. Her steps echoed through the main hall, where crystal chandeliers hung like tears frozen in time. Portraits of Lancaster ancestors watched her from the walls, severe-looking men and women of pale beauty who seemed to have died of sadness. And then she saw him. Dominic stood at the end of the main staircase, a vision that made Luna's heart race for reasons she couldn't comprehend. He was even more imposing in person, tall, broad shoulders that perfectly filled his black suit, a presence that dominated the environment effortlessly. But it was his eyes that paralyzed her. Blue like a storm at sea, fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel as if she were being dissected and adored at the same time. Dominic descended the stairs with calculated movements, each step a demonstration of absolute control. When he came close enough for Luna to smell his cologne, something masculine, woody, with touches of bergamot, he stopped at a respectful distance, but his eyes never left hers. "Luna," he said, and his voice was exactly as she had imagined. Deep, velvety, with a refined New York accent. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you." He didn't extend his hand to greet her. He made no mention of coming closer. He just observed her with that disturbing intensity, as if he were memorizing every detail of her face. "Mr. Lancaster," Luna responded, surprised by her own voice, which came out firmer than expected. "The pleasure is mine." A lie. There was no pleasure in that meeting, only an electric tension that made her feel as if she were walking on broken glass. Dominic was magnetically attractive, she couldn't deny that, but there was something about him that terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. The dinner was an event too formal for 3 people. Luna, her parents, and Dominic sat at a table that could easily accommodate 20 people. Crystal and silver gleamed under candlelight, while silent servants served dishes she could barely touch. The conversation revolved around business, investments, and plans for the wedding, as if she weren't present. Throughout the meal, Luna felt Dominic's eyes on her. When she raised her gaze, sometimes she caught him observing her with an indecipherable expression, something between fascination and torment. He drank red wine in small sips, his elegant hands never trembling, but she noticed that he gripped the crystal more tightly than necessary. "Luna turns 18 tomorrow," commented Robert, trying to fill a silence that had stretched too long. "I wondered if you would like to—" "There will be no birthday celebration," Dominic interrupted, his voice cutting. "It will be more appropriate to maintain discretion until the wedding." The coldness of the response made Luna shrink in her chair. She would be prevented even from celebrating her adulthood, as if her old life needed to be completely erased before the new one began. When dinner ended, Dominic stood up and, for the first time that night, addressed her directly. "Would you like to see the gardens?" he asked, extending his arm without touching her. Luna looked at her parents, who quickly nodded. There was no choice, just as there was no choice in anything related to her life now. She stood up and walked beside him through the glass doors that led to the terrace. The gardens of the Lancaster mansion were a labyrinth of plants that seemed chosen more for their somber beauty than for joy. Rose bushes with dark red petals, fountains that murmured like distant voices, paths that lost themselves in darkness. Luna pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, feeling a chill that didn't come only from the temperature. They walked in silence for several minutes, always maintaining a safe distance from each other. Dominic had his hands firmly buried in his pockets, as if he were fighting against the impulse to do something he shouldn't. "You're afraid of me," he finally said, more a statement than a question. Luna stopped walking and faced him. Under the moonlight, his face seemed sculpted in marble, beautiful and cold at the same time. "Should I be?" she asked in return. Dominic remained silent for so long that Luna thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice had a different quality, lower, almost vulnerable. "I would never hurt you physically," he said, "but I also can't promise that our life together will be easy." It was the most honest declaration anyone had made to her in weeks. Luna felt a strange gratitude for that small dose of truth amid so many elegant lies. "Why did you agree to marry me?" she asked. "A man like you certainly doesn't need to buy a wife." Dominic's eyes shone with something that could be pain or anger, perhaps both. "Necessity," he answered simply. "Just like you." And in that response, Luna understood that both were prisoners of that arrangement, each for their own dark reasons. The wedding took place on a suffocatingly hot January morning, in an intimate ceremony in the private chapel of the Lancaster mansion. Luna woke up in the guest room that had been designated for her, a luxurious but cold environment decorated in blue and silver tones that more resembled a hotel suite than a home. She had spent the previous night there, following a tradition that Dominic insisted on maintaining, although both knew that traditions were the least of their concerns in that marriage. The wedding dress had belonged to Dominic's grandmother, a 1940s model of ivory silk, with delicate embroidery that told stories of an era when women were even more prisoners of their circumstances. Luna looked at herself in the mirror and saw a ghostly version of herself, as if she were wearing the clothes of a ghost to become one. The chapel was small, built of dark stone and stained glass that projected colored shadows on the marble floor. Only Luna's parents and 2 lawyers were present as witnesses. There was no family on Dominic's side. He had been an orphan for decades, and the relatives that remained lived in a veiled hostility that made any reunion impossible. When Luna entered the chapel to the sound of an ancient organ, Dominic stood before the altar with the posture of a general before battle. The black suit made him look even more imposing, but it was his eyes that caught her off guard. For the first time since she'd met him, there was something different in that storm-blue gaze, an intensity that bordered on adoration mixed with an anguish he struggled to hide. The priest, an elderly and discreet man, conducted the ceremony with the efficiency of someone who had presided over many arranged marriages among elite New York families. The words sounded empty in the stale air of the chapel, promises that both knew had not been chosen by them. When the moment for vows came, Dominic spoke with a firm but low voice, his eyes fixed on Luna's with a penetration that made her tremble. "I promise to protect you, respect you, and honor this commitment we have made before God and the law." There was no love in those words, but there was something Luna couldn't identify, a solemnity that seemed to come from a very deep and painful place within him. When it was her turn, Luna felt her throat dry. The words that came from her lips were the traditional ones, but she pronounced them looking directly into his eyes. "I promise to be your loyal companion, in all circumstances that life brings us." The moment of the kiss came as an inevitable and terrifying event. Luna saw Dominic approach slowly, his eyes descending to her lips with a hesitation that contrasted with all his usual authority. When he finally touched her, just a chaste kiss, quick, more a brushing of lips than a true kiss, it was as if an electric current passed through both. Dominic moved away immediately, but Luna saw his hands trembling slightly when he put them back in his pockets. For a man who had spent his entire life avoiding physical contact, even that minimal kiss had been a torture and a revelation. There was no honeymoon. After the ceremony and an equally silent formal lunch, Luna's parents said goodbye with embraces. That seemed like definitive farewells. Robert murmured in his daughter's ear that she was now a Lancaster, that she should honor the name and forget the past. Claire simply kissed her on the forehead with eyes full of tears she refused to shed. And then Luna found herself alone in the Lancaster mansion with a husband she barely knew and who seemed determined to keep things that way. The room that Dominic designated for her was on the second floor at the end of a corridor that seemed to extend for miles. It was a suite larger than the entire living room of friends' houses, decorated with antique furniture and Persian rugs that muffled any sound. The canopy bed seemed too large for one person, but Luna quickly understood that it was exactly that. It would always be just one person. Dominic slept on another floor in a room he kept locked and from which Luna never saw him emerge in the morning. It was as if he materialized already dressed and perfectly groomed in the office or dining room, an elegant ghost that haunted his own house. The first days in the Lancaster mansion were an education in loneliness amid luxury. Luna woke up in Egyptian silk sheets, bathed in a marble bathroom larger than her old bedroom, wore clothes that cost fortunes and were delivered daily by exclusive boutiques. She had servants available for any need, entire libraries to explore, extensive gardens to walk in, but she had no company. Dominic left early for the office and returned late, always carrying folders and tension in his shoulders. When they were in the same environment, during meals or in the rare moments when he worked in the library, he treated her with a formal courtesy that was more painful than coldness. He asked if she was comfortable, if she needed anything, if the servants were meeting her needs, but he never asked how she felt, never attempted a real conversation, never looked at her for longer than strictly necessary. Luna began to understand that Dominic wasn't just avoiding intimacy, he was terrified of it. She sometimes caught him observing her when he thought she wasn't looking, his face contorted in an expression of desire and agony that made her question everything she thought she knew about this man. One night, 2 weeks after the wedding, Luna decided she could no longer bear the silence. She went down to Dominic's office, where the light was still on despite the late hour. The door was ajar and she could see him sitting behind the mahogany desk, his hair slightly disheveled, his tie loosened, a bottle of whiskey and a half-empty glass at his side. He was reading something that looked like a report, but his eyes seemed lost, as if the words were just an excuse not to face his own thoughts. Luna knocked lightly on the door and entered without waiting for permission. Dominic raised his eyes immediately, and she saw something in them that surprised her, relief, as if he had been waiting for her, even though he would never admit it. "Sorry to disturb you," said Luna, closing the door behind her, "but we need to talk." Dominic leaned back in his chair, hands crossed over his chest, once again assuming That posture of control she was beginning to recognize as armor. About what? About the fact that we've been married for 2 weeks, and you act as if I'm a stranger. About the fact that you can barely stay in the same room as me. About the fact that if we continue like this, we'll both go crazy. Luna's frankness seemed to disarm him momentarily. He poured another glass of whiskey and pushed it toward her. A simple gesture, but it was the closest thing to intimacy they had shared since the wedding. "You want to know the truth?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "The truth is that I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a husband, how to share space with someone, how to—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair. "How to live with someone I desire to touch, but can't." The confession fell between them like a bomb. Luna felt her heart race and her stomach contract simultaneously. "Why can't you?" Dominic laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. It was a bitter laugh laden with years of pain. "Because everything I touch gets destroyed, Luna. And you—" He looked at her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. "You are the first good thing that has entered this house in decades. I can't risk destroying you too." Dominic's words hung in the air like a confession he should never have made. Luna watched him rise abruptly from his chair and walk to the window, his back rigid with tension. The whiskey in her glass remained untouched as she processed what she had just heard. "What do you mean by, everything I touch gets destroyed?" asked Luna, her voice softer than she intended. Dominic kept his back to her, his shoulders tense beneath his white shirt. For several minutes, the only sound in the office was the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. When he finally spoke, his voice had a distant quality, as if he were telling someone else's story. "My mother died when I was 9 years old. Officially, it was an accident, but—" He paused, his hands closing into fists at his sides. "She was trying to protect me from my father. He discovered she was having an affair, that I wasn't his biological son. That night, they argued. I heard everything from my room, the screams, the threats, the sound of things being broken." Luna felt her heart tighten. She instinctively stood up, taking a few steps toward him, but stopped when she saw him become even more rigid. The next morning, they found her in the swimming pool. My father never admitted it, but I knew. I always knew. Dominic finally turned, and Luna saw in his eyes a pain so deep that it seemed to cut her own soul. If she hadn't loved me, if she hadn't tried to protect me, she would still be alive. "Dominic, you were 9 years old. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it?" he asked, with a bitterness that made Luna step back. "After that, my father taught me very well that love is a dangerous weakness. That touch creates dependency. That proximity leads to destruction. He kept me isolated, without physical contact with anyone, taught me that feelings were enemies I needed to defeat." Dominic walked back to the desk and drank the rest of his whiskey in one gulp. His hands trembled almost imperceptibly when he set the glass back on the wood. "And I believed him, Luna. For almost 30 years I believed he was right. I built a financial empire precisely because I was cold, calculating, incapable of being emotionally affected by anything or anyone." "Until I arrived," Luna said, more a statement than a question. Dominic's eyes met hers, and Luna saw in them a vulnerability he desperately struggled to hide. "Until you arrived," he confirmed, "and now I understand what my father meant about dependency, because in 2 weeks you've already managed to leave me completely unsettled." The confession hit Luna like a wave. She could see the war happening inside him, desire fighting against years of conditioning, need battling against fear. "So what do we do?" she asked. "Continue living as strangers forever?" "I don't know," Dominic admitted, running his hands through his hair. "I don't know how to be different from what I am." Luna approached him slowly, observing how he tensed with each step she took. When she came close enough to feel the heat emanating from his body, she stopped. "May I touch you?" she asked, her voice low. Dominic's eyes widened as if she had suggested something absolutely radical. He looked at her extended hand as if it were a venomous and dangerous snake. "Luna, it's just a question. You can say no." Dominic stood still for so long that Luna thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally nodded, an almost imperceptible movement of his head, she slowly raised her hand and touched his face. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Dominic closed his eyes tightly, a strange sound escaping from his throat, something between a moan and a sigh. His entire body trembled as if he were being electrocuted, but he didn't move away. His skin was warm and soft under Luna's fingers. She could feel the tension of the muscles in his jaw, the accelerated movement of his breathing, the pulse beating erratically in his neck. It was like touching a wild animal that was allowing, against all instincts, to be tamed. "When was the last time someone touched you like this?" Luna asked softly. "Never," Dominic responded without opening his eyes, his voice hoarse. "No one has ever touched me like this." The admission broke Luna's heart. A 36-year-old man who had never experienced the affectionate touch of another person, a man who had been deprived of the most basic and essential thing of human experience. "May I continue?" Dominic opened his eyes, and Luna saw in them a genuine fear mixed with a desire so intense that it made her feel as if she were looking directly at the sun. "If you stop now, I might be able to maintain control," he said, his voice tense. "But if you continue, what will happen if I continue? I don't know, and that terrifies me." Luna let her hand slide from his face to his neck, feeling the accelerated pulse under her fingers. Dominic closed his eyes again, his breathing becoming increasingly irregular. "Maybe it's time for you to stop being afraid," she whispered. "I don't know how." "Then let me teach you." Before Dominic could protest, Luna rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips against his. It wasn't like the chaste kiss of the wedding. It was something real, intense, charged with 2 weeks of accumulated tension. For a moment, Dominic remained completely still, as if his brain had stopped functioning. Then, as if a dam had broken, he pulled her against him with a force that surprised her, his hands finally leaving his pockets to grab her waist, as if she were the only thing keeping him anchored to reality. The kiss transformed into something desperate, hungry, as if they were trying to recover years of deprivation in a single moment. Dominic kissed like a man who was drowning and had finally found air, with an intensity that bordered on desperation. When they finally separated, both were breathless. Dominic rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, his hands still, trembling against Luna's waist. "That was a mistake," he said, but he didn't let her go. "Was it?" Luna asked, smiling for the first time in weeks. "Yes," Dominic answered, opening his eyes and looking at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "Because now I won't be able to stop wanting more." "Then don't stop." Luna's words echoed in the office like a challenge and a promise, and for the first time since they met, Dominic smiled, a small, hesitant smile, but genuine. "You have no idea what you're asking for," he said. "Then show me." The week that followed that kiss transformed the dynamics of the Lancaster mansion in a subtle but profound way. Dominic didn't change overnight. He still maintained a certain distance, still fought against his own impulses. But there was a different tension in the air, an electricity that pulsed between them whenever they were in the same environment. Luna noticed the small changes first, the way his eyes lingered on her face during breakfast, how he began to work in the library instead of locking himself in the office, allowing her to stay nearby while she read, how his hands trembled slightly when she passed near him, as if he were fighting against the impulse to touch her again. It was a delicate dance of approach and retreat, advance and hesitation. Dominic was like a wounded animal, learning to trust again, and Luna needed all her patience not to scare him back into the shell of isolation he had built. On Thursday of that week, something definitely changed. Luna woke up early and went down to the kitchen in search of coffee, still wearing the silk robe that had become her morning uniform. She found Dominic standing before the living room window, still in clothes from the previous day, a glass of whiskey in hand and a somber expression on his face. "You didn't sleep," she said, more an observation than a question. Dominic turned at the sound of her voice, and Luna immediately saw that something was wrong. There was a tension in his shoulders that went beyond the usual, a rigidity in his posture that suggested problems beyond the personal. Some problems arose during the night, he said, drinking the rest of the whiskey. Business issues that need immediate attention. Luna approached him slowly, observing how he didn't retreat as he used to do. Their progress had been subtle, but it was real. Do you want to talk about it? Dominic laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Do you really want to hear about corporate conspiracy at 6 in the morning? I want to hear about anything that's putting that look on your face. Luna's honesty seemed to disarm some defense within him. Dominic placed the empty glass on the table and turned to face her completely. Someone is trying to question my legitimacy as CEO of Lancaster Holdings, he said. Documents about my paternity were leaked to specific members of the board of directors. If they can prove I'm not the biological son of the company's founder, I could lose everything. Luna felt her blood freeze. But how would someone get those documents? This happened more than 30 years ago. That's exactly the question I'm asking myself, Dominic responded, his eyes darkening. And the only person who had access to this information, besides my late father, was my father, Luna completed, the realization hitting her like a punch. The silence that followed was deafening. Luna saw in Dominic's eyes a mixture of pain and suspicion that made her step back. Did you know? He asked, his voice dangerously low. Of course not, Luna exclaimed. Dominic, I didn't even know you weren't your father's biological son until you told me. Dominic studied her face for long seconds, as if looking for signs of lying. When he finally relaxed his shoulders, Luna realized she had been holding her breath without noticing. I believe you, he said finally. But this means that someone very close to our family has information that could destroy me, and that puts us in a very dangerous position. What are we going to do? The question came out naturally, as if they were really a team, a unit. Dominic seemed to notice this too, because something softened in his expression. We'll find out who's behind this, and why, he said. But Luna, I need you to understand that the next few weeks could be difficult. If this information leaks publicly, it won't be just my position that will be at risk. Our family, our safety, everything could be at stake. Luna took another step toward him, not stopping until she was close enough to feel the heat from his body. Then we face it together, she said, raising her hand to touch his face again. This time, Dominic didn't hesitate. He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes as if that simple contact were the only thing keeping him sane. You don't understand, he murmured. If they discover I'm not legitimately a Lancaster, our marriage could be annulled. The contract with your father could be considered fraudulent. You could be free. Luna felt her heart race, but not for the reason Dominic expected. And do you want me to be free? She asked. Dominic opened his eyes and looked at her with an intensity that made her forget to breathe. No, he admitted, his voice hoarse. God forgive me, but no. The idea of you being with another man, of you leaving my life. He shook his head. I couldn't bear it. The confession was like a dam breaking. Without thinking, Luna rose on her tiptoes and kissed him again. This time with more urgency, more need. Dominic responded immediately, his large hands wrapping around her waist, pulling her against his body as if she were the only real thing in the world. The kiss deepened quickly, years of deprivation translating into desperate hunger. Dominic's hands moved up Luna's back, his fingers tangling in her hair, while she explored his chest through his wrinkled shirt. When they finally separated, both were breathing with difficulty. Dominic rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed, visibly fighting against his own self-control. Luna, he said, his voice tense, if we continue like this, I won't be able to stop. Who said I want you to stop? Dominic's eyes opened immediately, dark with desire and something deeper that Luna was beginning to recognize as true love. Are you sure? He asked. Because once we cross this line, there's no going back. And with everything that's happening, with all the dangers that may be coming, Luna silenced him with another kiss, softer this time but no less intense. Especially because of everything that's happening, she whispered against his lips. Life is too uncertain to waste the time we have. Dominic looked at her for another moment, as if memorizing every detail of her face. Then, without warning, he lifted her in his arms, making her laugh in surprise. "In that case," he said, carrying her toward the stairs, "we have a lot of lost time to make up for." As Dominic climbed the stairs with Luna in his arms, neither of them noticed the shadowy figure watching from the rear window of the mansion, nor the discreet flash of a camera photographing the intimate moment. The threats surrounding the Lancaster family were more real and immediate than they imagined, and the danger was closer than either of them could suspect. But at that moment, climbing the stairs toward an intimacy they had both denied for too long, Luna and Dominic were lost in each other, unaware that hostile eyes were already observing their every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Luna woke up enveloped in arms that held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. The golden light of the New York morning filtered through the heavy curtains of Dominic's bedroom, an environment she had imagined many times but never dared hope to know so intimately. Everything there reflected his complex personality: dark mahogany furniture, walls in shades of graphite, works of art that were simultaneously beautiful and disturbing. Dominic's body was relaxed against hers in a way Luna had never seen before. During sleep, all his defenses had crumbled, revealing a vulnerability he would never allow while awake. His black hair was disheveled, falling over his forehead, and there was a peace on his face that contrasted drastically with the constant tension he carried during the day. Luna turned carefully in his arms, observing how even while sleeping Dominic kept her close, as if afraid she would disappear if he relaxed his guard. The previous night had been a revelation in every sense, not just the first time they made love, but the first time Dominic allowed someone to touch him with real affection, the first time he had completely given himself to another person. It had been intense, overwhelming, full of a passion accumulated after weeks of tension, but also surprisingly tender. Dominic had touched her as if she were made of crystal, with a reverence that bordered on adoration. Between desperate kisses and caresses that left trails of fire on her skin, he had murmured things in her ear that made her understand this wasn't just physical desire, it was love, true and absolute. "You're watching me sleep," Dominic's hoarse voice made her jump slightly. He had opened his eyes and was observing her with a small but genuine smile, something she was learning to value because it was so rare. "You're handsome when you sleep," Luna responded, tracing the line of his jaw with her fingers. "You look at peace." "I am at peace," Dominic said, capturing her hand and kissing the palm. "For the first time in years, I'm truly at peace." The moment of tenderness was interrupted by the sound of the phone ringing insistently on the nightstand. Dominic growled softly, but answered when he saw the name of Marcus Wright, his lawyer and confidant, on the display. "Marcus, this better be important," Dominic answered, his voice already assuming the business tone. Luna observed his expression change drastically as the conversation progressed. His relaxed body tensed, the muscles in his shoulders contracted, and a hard line formed between his eyebrows. "I understand. Yes, I'll be there in an hour," Dominic finally said, hanging up the phone with more force than necessary. "What happened?" Luna asked, already fearing the answer. Dominic sat on the edge of the bed, running his hands through his hair, in a gesture of frustration that Luna was beginning to recognize. "The documents about my paternity weren't just leaked to the board. They reached the press. The New York Times is going to publish an article tomorrow questioning my legitimacy as the Lancaster heir." Luna felt her stomach sink. This means we have few hours before all of New York knows that I may not be who I always thought I was," Dominic said, getting up and beginning to dress with precise and controlled movements, "and that our marriage may be based on a farce." "Dominic, stop." Luna stood up too, wrapping the sheet around her body. "What happened between us yesterday wasn't a farce. The feelings we have for each other aren't a farce." Dominic stopped, buttoning his shirt, and looked at her with an expression that mixed gratitude and desperation. "I know that, but the rest of the world won't know, and there are people who will use this to destroy us." Before Luna could respond, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but something made her answer. "Luna Lancaster?" An unfamiliar female voice asked on the other end of the line. "Yes, who is this?" My name is Sophia Brennan. I'm an investigative reporter. I'd like to ask you some questions about your marriage to Dominic Lancaster and your family's relationship, with certain financial irregularities that have emerged in our investigation. Luna felt her blood freeze. I have nothing to say, she said, quickly hanging up. Dominic was watching her with a somber expression. Let me guess. Press? A reporter wanting to talk about financial irregularities in my family, Luna answered, feeling nausea rising in her throat. They're connecting the dots, Dominic said, finishing dressing. Whoever is behind this isn't just trying to bring me down. They're trying to destroy our connection too. Luna dressed quickly, while processing the implications. When they went down for breakfast, they found Marcus Wright waiting in the living room, a tall, thin man with graying hair and sharp eyes that missed little. The situation is worse than we imagined, Marcus said without preamble. Besides the documents about your paternity, Dominic, evidence has also emerged that Robert Mitchell was involved in a money laundering scheme that used shell companies controlled by the Lancasters in the 1990s. Luna felt her legs weaken. This can't be true. Unfortunately, the evidence is convincing, Marcus continued. Your father not only knew the Lancaster family's secrets, he was an active accomplice in operations that today would be considered criminal. So my marriage to Luna was planned decades ago, Dominic said, his voice dangerously low. It wasn't just a solution to my current financial problems, it was to seal an old criminal alliance. Luna felt as if the floor were collapsing beneath her feet. You're saying my parents sold me not just to settle recent debts, but to protect old crimes? That's exactly what we're saying, Marcus confirmed. And there's more. The person leaking this information has access to files that should have been destroyed years ago. This suggests the leak is coming from within the Lancaster family itself. Impossible, Dominic said immediately. There's no one alive who has access to these documents. Yes, there is, a cold voice said from the living room door. Everyone turned to see an elegant woman, about 50 years old, entering the room as if she owned the place. Luna didn't recognize her, but she saw Dominic, immediately turn pale. Helen, he said, his voice laden with shock and something that seemed like fear. The woman smiled, but there was no warmth in the expression. Hello, dear nephew. I thought it was time we met properly. Nephew, Luna repeated, confused. Helen Lancaster. Because she was obviously a Lancaster, she had the same penetrating blue eyes and the same aristocratic features, approached with calculated movements. I'm the younger sister of Dominic's father, she explained, without taking her eyes off his face. The daughter who was disinherited 20 years ago when I questioned certain family practices, the woman who spent 2 decades collecting evidence against this family. You, Dominic said, the realization clear in his voice. You're the one leaking the information. Guilty, Helen said with a smile that was pure coldness, and I can't wait to see this rotten empire of lies finally crumble. Luna looked between Dominic and Helen, realizing she had just met the source of all their threats. But what terrified her most was the expression on Dominic's face, a mixture of betrayal, anger, and something that seemed like absolute despair. What do you want, Helen? Dominic asked, his voice too controlled to be natural. Justice, she answered simply. For my dead sister-in-law, for all the victims of this family's crimes, and especially, she looked directly at Luna, for the innocent young woman who was dragged into this web of lies without knowing the truth about the man she married. The silence that followed was deafening. Luna felt as if she was standing on the edge of a precipice, knowing that Helen's next words would change her forever, and perhaps completely destroy the love she had just discovered. Helen Lancaster made herself comfortable in the leather armchair, as if she were the owner of the mansion, crossing her legs with calculated elegance. Her blue eyes, so similar to Dominic's but cold as Antarctic ice, scanned the room with a familiarity that suggested she knew every corner of the place. 20 years, she said, her voice laden with bitterness. 20 years since I set foot in this house for the last time, since my dear brother expelled me because I dared to question the family methods. You were expelled because you tried to blackmail him, Dominic said, his voice tense. Because You tried to use my mother's death to extort money. Helen laughed, a humorless sound that echoed through the room like shattering glass. Blackmail? I was trying to ensure that the truth came out, that the woman who died protecting you finally had justice. Luna observed the exchange between aunt and nephew, as if watching a dark play, feeling that each word revealed layers of secrets she was only beginning to understand. What truth? Luna asked, ignoring the warning look Dominic gave her. Helen turned to her with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Oh, dear child, you really don't know anything, do you? Your husband didn't tell you that his mother's death wasn't just a murder disguised as an accident. It was a premeditated murder, planned with the help of... She made a dramatic pause. Your own father. Luna's. World stopped. She felt as if all breath had been sucked from her lungs. That's a lie, Dominic said immediately, but there was a hesitation in his voice that Luna had never heard before. Is it? Helen asked, taking a thick envelope from her purse. Robert Mitchell wasn't just an accountant for Lancaster Holdings in the 1990s. He was the man who helped my brother create all the false documentation that allowed Isabella Lancaster's murder to appear as an accident. Luna stood up abruptly, her legs trembling. No, my father may have many flaws, but he is not a murderer. Not directly, Helen agreed, but he provided the legal infrastructure that allowed my brother to go unpunished. He falsified autopsy, reports created alibis, manipulated witnesses, and in return, she threw a folder on the center table. He received a silent participation in various Lancaster companies that kept him rich for decades. Dominic approached the table and opened the folder with hands that trembled almost imperceptibly. Luna saw his face pale even more as he examined the documents. These documents, he began, are all authentic, Helen completed. I kept copies of everything all these years, every money transfer, every falsified document, every lie told. Your wife, my dear nephew, is the daughter of the man who helped murder your mother. The silence that followed was absolute. Luna felt as if she was sinking in icy waters, as if the floor had completely disappeared beneath her feet. She looked at Dominic, seeking denial, seeking any sign that Helen was lying. But the expression on his face was that of a man whose reality had just been shattered. Dominic, Luna said, her voice breaking, you can't believe this. My father may have done wrong things, but... But what? Luna? Dominic turned to her, and there was a coldness in his eyes that made her step back. Your father sold you to me to settle debts. Now we discover that these debts exist because he was an accomplice in my mother's murder. That our family has a 30-year history of conspiracy and crime. This doesn't change what we feel for each other, Luna said desperately. Doesn't it? Dominic asked, his voice rising. Luna, you're the daughter of the man who helped kill my mother. How can I look at you and not see that? The words hit Luna like physical punches. She saw the man she had begun to love transforming again into the cold stranger she had met on the first day. Because I am not my father, she shouted. Just as you are not yours, you yourself said you're not his biological son. But I was raised by him, Dominic responded, running his hands through his hair. I was shaped by a murderer, and you... He looked at her with an expression of pain and disgust. You carry the blood of his accomplice. Helen observed the discussion with evident satisfaction. Beautiful, isn't it? She commented. How truth can destroy even the purest love. But I'm not finished yet. She stood up and walked to the window, observing the mansion's gardens. You see, my dears, the plan was never just to expose the crimes of the past. The plan is to ensure that the Lancaster family pays for everything they did, and that includes... She turned with a cruel smile. Ensuring that Dominic loses everything. The company, the fortune, the reputation, and especially the only thing he finally learned to love. What do you want? Dominic asked, his voice dangerously low. I want you to sign the transfer of control, to have Lancaster Holdings to me, Helen said simply. I want you to hand over everything voluntarily, acknowledging that you have no legitimate right to any of it. And if I refuse? Then tomorrow, besides the article about your dubious paternity, the New York Times will also publish photographic evidence that your wife has been having an intimate relationship with Marcus Wright for weeks." Luna felt the world spin around. That's impossible. I barely know Marcus." Helen laughed again. "Dear, you really underestimate the power of digital photography and competent editing. I have very convincing photos of you two in compromising situations." "You're bluffing," Dominic said, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "Am I?" Helen asked, taking some photos from the envelope and spreading them on the table. Luna looked at the images and felt nausea rise in her throat. They were photos of her with Marcus, digitally manipulated but convincingly, that suggested an intimacy that had never existed. "And there's more," Helen continued. "I have evidence that Luna knew about her father's involvement in Isabella's murder, that she married you specifically to protect the family secrets." "That's a lie," Luna shouted. "Of course it is," Helen agreed. "But will Dominic believe you? Will the public believe you? Does it matter what's true when the lies are so well constructed?" Dominic looked at Luna with an expression that mixed pain, confusion, and a suspicion she knew would destroy any chance of them overcoming this situation together. "You have a choice, Dominic," Helen said. "Sign the transfer of control of the company, and I guarantee that Luna will emerge from this situation unharmed. Her reputation will be preserved, and you can try to build a life away from all this. And if I don't sign, then I'll destroy you, both publicly, completely, irreversibly." Luna looked at Dominic, seeing the war happening inside him. The man she had learned to love was being forced to choose between saving her and losing everything he had built during his life. And by the expression on his face, she knew which choice he would make. "I need time to think," Dominic finally said. "You have until noon tomorrow," Helen responded, heading for the door. "After that, the photos go to every newspaper in New York." When Helen left, Luna and Dominic remained alone in the room, separated by a distance that seemed insurmountable. The silence between them was laden with unspoken accusations, unexpressed doubts, and a love that was being tested beyond its limits. "Dominic," Luna finally said, "do you believe her?" When he looked at her, Luna saw in his eyes a pain so deep that she knew, regardless of what he decided, they would never be the same again. The night that followed was the longest of Luna's life. Dominic had locked himself in his office after Helen's departure, refusing to dine and ignoring all of Luna's attempts to talk to him. She spent hours walking the corridors of the mansion, her steps echoing like the beats of a lonely heart, trying to process everything she had discovered about her family and about the man she loved. Around 2 in the morning, Luna gave up trying to sleep. She went down to the kitchen in search of tea and found Dominic sitting at the table, still wearing the wrinkled suit from the day, an almost empty bottle of whiskey in front of him, and papers scattered around him like evidence of a life that was crumbling. "Dominic," she said softly, but he didn't raise his eyes. "I found more documents," he said, his voice hoarse from alcohol and exhaustion. "In my father's archives. Your father wasn't just an accomplice. He was the one who suggested the method, who planned how to make it look like an accident." Luna felt her legs weaken. She supported herself on the chair beside him, but didn't. "Sit down. Dominic, I swear by everything sacred that I knew nothing about this." "How can I believe you?" he asked, finally looking at her. His blue eyes were bloodshot, laden with a pain that seemed to be destroying him from within. "How can I believe anyone whose entire existence is based on my mother's blood?" "Because you know me," Luna answered, her voice trembling. "Because you've spent weeks with me. Because you've seen me, touched me, loved me. Because when you kiss me, you know there's no lie on my lips." Dominic laughed bitterly. "I thought I knew my own family too. I thought my father, despite all his flaws, wasn't a cold-blooded murderer." "I'm not my father," Luna shouted, slamming her hand on the table. "Just as you are not yours. Yesterday, when we were together, when you touched me as if I were the most precious thing in the world, that moment was real. The feelings we have are real." "Are they?" Dominic asked, rising abruptly. "Or were they built on lies so elaborate that even we no longer know what's true?" Luna felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "There's a way to find out," she said. "We can investigate together. We can find the real truth. not the version Helen wants us to believe. Luna? No, she interrupted him. Listen, Helen waited 20 years for revenge, 20 years collecting evidence, planning, plotting. Do you really think she wouldn't be capable of manipulating documents, of creating a narrative that serves her purposes? Dominic was silent for a moment, and Luna saw a spark of hope in his eyes. Even if she manipulated some facts, he said slowly, she can't have invented everything. My mother really died. Your father really was involved with my family at that time. Then let's discover the real extent of his involvement, Luna said, approaching him. Let's find out what really happened to your mother. Together. For a moment, Dominic seemed to be considering the proposal. His eyes studied Luna's face as if looking for signs of deception, for hidden lies. If I discover that you knew anything, he began. Then you have the right to hate me for the rest of your life, Luna completed. But if I'm telling the truth, if I'm really innocent in this whole story, then you need to stop punishing me for other people's crimes. Dominic was silent for so long that Luna thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice had a different quality, still laden with pain but with a determination she recognized. Marcus has contacts in the police department, people who can access old files without drawing attention, he said. If we're going to do this, we have to be discreet. Helen can't know we're investigating. So you trust me? Luna asked, daring to approach one more step. I don't know, Dominic admitted, but I trust what I felt when I touched you. And if that was real, then maybe we can find a way out of this situation together. For the first time in hours, Luna felt hope blooming in her chest. She extended her hand to him, a small but significant gesture. Together, she repeated. Dominic looked at the extended hand for several seconds before taking it. His touch was still hesitant, laden with doubts, but it was a start. There's something else you need to know, he said, intertwining his fingers with hers. About the deadline Helen gave me. It's not just about the company. If I don't sign the transfer by noon tomorrow, she'll publish that our marriage is a farce, that you were involved in the conspiracy from the beginning. Your reputation will be destroyed along with mine. I don't care about my reputation, Luna said immediately. I care about the truth, and I care about you. Luna, you don't understand. If Helen fulfills her threats, you could go to prison as an accomplice. Even if you're innocent, even if we prove it later, the scandal could destroy your life. Luna squeezed his hand harder. Then we have to find evidence by tomorrow morning. We have to expose Helen before she can expose us. In less than 10 hours? In less than 10 hours, Luna confirmed. Can Marcus help us? Dominic looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost 3 in the morning. Marcus has been loyal to me for 15 years. If anyone can help us find the truth quickly, it's him. He picked up the phone. I'll call him. Now. As Dominic dialed, Luna felt a mixture of fear and determination running through her veins. They had few hours to unmask a decades-old conspiracy, to save not only their future, but also the love that had been born amid chaos. Marcus's sleepy voice answered on the other end of the line. Marcus, I need you here now, Dominic said without preamble. Bring all your contacts in the police department and the archives department. We have a conspiracy to unmask, and less than 10 hours to do it. After hanging up, Dominic turned to Luna. I hope you're right about your innocence, he said, because if we're not, by noon tomorrow we'll both be ruined. I'm right, Luna said with a conviction that surprised even herself. And when this is over, when we prove that Helen is lying about at least part of the story, you'll remember why you started to love me. Dominic pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. I never stopped loving you, he admitted. That's the problem. Even with all these revelations, even with all the doubts, I still love you, and that terrifies me. Then use that love as strength, Luna whispered. Use it to fight for us. When Marcus arrived 20 minutes later, he found Luna and Dominic side by side in the library, surrounded by documents and determined to discover the truth that would save not only their lives, but also the love they were willing to fight to preserve. The final battle was just beginning. The first lights of dawn were beginning to filter through the library windows when Marcus returned with a thick folder and a triumphant expression on his face. Luna and Dominic had spent the last 4 hours analyzing every document they could find in the mansion's archives, but it was the material Marcus brought that would change everything. "I found something interesting," Marcus said, spreading photos and documents on the already crowded table. "My contact in the police managed to access the original files of the Isabella Lancaster case, and there are significant discrepancies between what was officially archived and what Helen has been presenting." Luna leaned over the table, her heart racing. "What kind of discrepancies?" "For starters," Marcus said, pointing to an old photo, "this is not Isabella Lancaster." Dominic raised his head abruptly. "What do you mean?" "The woman in this photo that Helen showed yesterday, identified as your mother, is actually Helen Lancaster at 25 years old. My contact compared it with photos from her identity card. Helen is using photos of herself when young to represent her dead sister-in-law." Luna felt as if a light had been lit in the darkness. "So she's lying about having visual evidence." "Not just that," Marcus continued, turning pages of the police report. "The official report of Isabella Lancaster's death shows that she died of natural causes, cerebral aneurysm while in the swimming pool. It wasn't drowning. The body was found floating, but the autopsy confirmed she was already dead when she entered the water." Dominic remained motionless for several seconds, processing the information. "So, it wasn't murder?" "By all indications, no. Your mother had an undiagnosed aneurysm. It could have happened at any moment, anywhere." Marcus pulled another document. "And there's more. Robert Mitchell really worked for Lancaster Holdings, but only as an external tax consultant. He never had access to confidential family documents, nor did he participate in any internal operation." Luna felt tears of relief welling in her eyes. "My father is innocent. At least regarding Isabella Lancaster's death, yes, but—" Marcus hesitated. "There is evidence that Helen falsified various documents over the years, including those she presented yesterday. She has a history of extortion attempts against the family, all frustrated." "Why would she do this?" Luna asked. "Why dedicate her entire life to destroying her own family?" Dominic stood up and walked to the window, his shoulders tense. When he turned, there was a somber expression on his face. "Because she was obsessed with my father," he said slowly. "She always was. When we were younger, before my mother's death, Helen was always here, always finding excuses to visit, always trying to get his attention." "You think she was in love with him?" Luna asked. "I know she was. And when he refused to have any involvement with her after my mother's death, when he expelled her from the house, it transformed into obsession, into revenge." Marcus nodded. "That makes sense. The documents show she tried to sue the family for inheritance 3 times in the last 20 years. All attempts were rejected for lack of evidence." "So all this is revenge?" Luna asked. "She's trying to destroy Dominic because she couldn't have his father?" "That's exactly it," Dominic confirmed. "And she's using you as a weapon because she knows you're the only thing that can really destroy me. Now." Luna felt her heart race with the indirect admission of love, but forced herself to focus on the immediate problem. "Do we have enough evidence to expose her?" Marcus smiled for the first time since he arrived. "We have enough evidence to completely discredit her. The false photos, the forged documents, the history of extortion attempts. I can take all this to the police right now." "No," Dominic said immediately. "If we do that, she might publish the fake photos of Luna before the police can stop her. We need to confront her directly." "That's dangerous," Marcus warned. "Helen has spent decades planning this. She won't give up easily." Luna stood up and walked to Dominic, taking his hands. "Then we confront her together, with all the evidence. We show that we know she's lying and give her a chance to back down before we destroy her publicly." Dominic intertwined his fingers with hers, and Luna saw in his eyes something she hadn't seen in hours: hope. "Are you sure you want to be involved in this? It could be dangerous." "I'm sure," Luna answered without hesitation. "This is our life she's trying to destroy, our chance to be happy together. I won't let her take that from us." Dominic's phone rang at that moment. Helen's name appeared on the display. "It's her," he said. "Answer it," Luna said, squeezing his hand, "but put it on speakerphone. We want to hear what she has to say." Dominic answered the call. Helen. "Good morning, dear nephew." Her voice sounded too sweet through the phone. "I hope you had a productive night to think about my proposal." "I had a very productive night," Dominic responded, looking directly at Luna. "Discovered some very interesting things." "Oh, did you?" Helen's voice became slightly tense. "What kind of things?" "The kind of things where you falsified photos of my mother using your own old photos. The kind of things where you forged documents about Robert Mitchell. The kind of things where you have a 20-year history of failed attempts to extort my family." The silence on the other end of the line extended for several seconds. "You're bluffing," Helen finally said, but her voice had lost all its previous confidence. "Am I?" Dominic asked. "How about we meet in person to discuss this? You can bring your false evidence and I can bring the real evidence." "Where?" Helen asked after another silence. "At the mansion, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And Helen—" Dominic paused, looking at Luna with an intensity that made her feel as if she were on fire. "Bring a lawyer. You're going to need one." When he hung up the phone, Dominic pulled Luna into his arms for the first time since Helen's revelation the previous— "Teot, I'm sorry," he whispered in her ear. "I'm sorry for doubting you, for letting her lies come between us." "You don't need to apologize," Luna responded, sinking into his embrace. "You were protecting your heart. After everything you've been through, it was natural to be afraid." "It wasn't natural," Dominic said, pulling away just enough to look into her eyes. "What's natural is this, the two of us together facing anything the world throws in our way." Marcus discreetly cleared his throat, not wanting to interrupt the moment, "but we have 2 hours to prepare for the final confrontation. Helen won't give up easily." Dominic nodded but didn't let go of Luna. "Then let's prepare," he said, "and this time, when it's all over, nothing and no one will be able to separate us again." Luna rose on her tiptoes and kissed him, a kiss full of promise, of forgiveness, of love that had survived the most brutal storm. When they separated, she saw in his eyes not just love, but a fierce determination that she knew would lead them to victory. The final battle was about to begin, and they would face it together. At exactly 1 o'clock, Helen Lancaster crossed the gates of the mansion with the posture of a queen returning to claim her throne. But Luna, watching from the library window, noticed something different in her body language. A tension in her shoulders, a rigidity in her movements that suggested she wasn't as confident as she wanted to appear. Dominic had spent the entire morning on the phone with lawyers and press contacts, preparing a strategy that would ensure that, when Helen was exposed, the truth would reach the public before she could make any desperate move. Luna had remained by his side during each call, a constant presence reminding him that he wasn't fighting alone. "She's here," Luna announced, moving away from the window. Dominic rose from the table where he had meticulously organized all the evidence, original police documents, expert reports, authentic photographs of Isabella Lancaster, and mainly, proof that Helen had used her own young photos to forge evidence about her dead sister-in-law. "Ready?" he asked, extending his hand to Luna. "Ready," she answered, intertwining her fingers with his. Marcus awaited them. In the living room, a digital recording prepared to capture every word of the confrontation. Outside, 2 private detectives Marcus had hired waited in a discreet car, ready to intervene if necessary. Helen entered the room with the same arrogance as the day before, but Luna immediately noticed that she hadn't brought any lawyer. It was a bluff. She was alone, and by the slightly trembling movements of her hands, not as confident as she appeared. "Punctual as always," Helen said, making herself comfortable in the armchair without being invited. "I hope you've reached a sensible decision." "We have," Dominic responded, remaining standing. "We've decided to publicly expose a scammer who spent 2 decades forging evidence and trying to extort my family." Helen's mask slipped for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recomposed her expression. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" Luna stepped forward, taking the first photo from the pile of evidence. "Then can you explain? Why this photo? which you claim to be of Isabella Lancaster, has the stamp of Helen Lancaster's identity card from 1995. Helen looked at the photo, and Luna saw the exact moment when she realized she had been discovered. Her face paled, but she still tried to maintain the farce. That must be an administrative error. An administrative error? Dominic laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. And this forged document alleging that Robert Mitchell had access to confidential files, when company records clearly show that he only provided external tax consulting for 3 months. Marcus joined them, placing the official police report on the table. And mainly, he said, this autopsy report of Isabella Lancaster, which confirms that she died of cerebral aneurysm, not drowning. Natural causes, not murder. Helen remained silent for several seconds, her gaze scanning the documents as if looking for a way out. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its previous authority. "You don't understand," she said, the mask finally falling completely. "I loved that man for decades. Decades. She didn't deserve him. Isabella was weak, submissive, without personality. I would have been a much better wife for him." "So you built an entire life of lies and revenge because my father didn't reciprocate. Your feelings?" Dominic asked, his voice laden with contempt. "I dedicated my life to proving that he had made the wrong choice, that I was superior to her in every aspect." Helen stood up abruptly, her composure finally breaking down. "And when he died without ever acknowledging me, without ever giving me the chance I deserved, I decided I would destroy everything he built." Luna observed the woman before her, elegant, sophisticated, but completely consumed by an unhealthy obsession that had poisoned decades of her life. "And when you discovered that Dominic had married," Luna said, "you saw the perfect opportunity to destroy the only thing he truly loved." "Exactly," Helen shouted, all pretense of sanity abandoned. "Because if I couldn't have happiness, why should he?" The silence that followed was absolute. Helen had publicly confessed not only her unhealthy obsession, but also her deliberate attempt to destroy innocent lives out of pure revenge. "This conversation has been recorded," Marcus announced calmly, "and it will be delivered to the authorities, along with all the evidence of document falsification and attempted extortion." Helen looked around the room as if seeing everything for the first time. The realization that she had completely lost, not just the revenge but also her freedom, was visible on her face. "You can't do this to me," she said, but her voice came out weak, desperate. "Not only can we, but we already have," Dominic responded. "The detectives waiting outside will accompany you to the police station, and tomorrow every newspaper in New York will know the truth about Helen Lancaster and her decades of lies." When the detectives entered to escort Helen, she turned one last time to Dominic. "You think you've won?" she asked with the last vestige of venom she could gather. "You're still a bastard. You still don't have legitimate Lancaster blood." Dominic smiled, a genuine, free smile that Luna had never seen before. "You're right," he said. "I don't have Lancaster blood. And you know what? I've never felt so grateful for that in my entire life." When Helen was taken away, Luna and Dominic remained alone in the room, surrounded by the wreckage of a conspiracy that had dominated their lives for weeks. "It's over," Luna said, almost not believing it. "It's over," Dominic confirmed, pulling her into his arms. "And now we can begin." "Begin what?" "Our real life. Not the life that was planned for us, not the life that others wanted us to have. Our life. Together." Dominic kissed her then, a kiss that tasted of freedom, of future, of love that had survived the most brutal test possible. When they separated, Luna saw in his eyes not just love, but a peace that she knew he had sought his entire life. "I love you," he said, the words coming easily for the first time. "Not because it was arranged, not because it was convenient, but because you are brave, strong, loyal, and because you managed to teach me that love is not a weakness. It's the most powerful thing that exists." "I love you too," Luna responded, feeling as if she could finally breathe completely. "And I won't stop loving you just because now it's our choice instead of our obligation." 6 months later, Luna and Dominic renewed their vows in an intimate ceremony on a beach in the Hamptons. This time there were no contracts, no family, obligations, nothing but two people who had chosen to love each other completely. Robert Mitchell, cleared of all accusations and deeply regretful for having sold his daughter, walked with Luna to the altar where Dominic waited for her with a smile that illuminated his entire face. Dominic had decided to sell the Lancaster mansion and build a new life, away from the shadows of the past. He and Luna moved to a house facing the ocean, where they woke up every day to the sound of waves and fell asleep in each other's arms every night. Helen Lancaster was convicted of document falsification and attempted extortion, and Luna never heard of her again. Sometimes when she was in Dominic's arms watching the sunset, she wondered if Helen had found peace in prison, or if she was still consumed by the bitterness that had destroyed her life. But these were thoughts that lasted only seconds, because the life Luna had built with Dominic was so full of love, of laughter, of passion and future, that there was no room to worry about ghosts from the past. They had begun as strangers, forced into an arranged marriage. But they had become partners, accomplices, lovers, and above all, two people who had chosen daily to love, protect, and build something beautiful together. And when Luna discovered she was pregnant on their first real wedding anniversary and saw Dominic cry with joy as he touched her belly, she knew that all the battles, all the pain, all the fears had been worth it.